All right. Well, it is 4 o'clock, so let's get started. Thank you all for coming. It is my pleasure to introduce our two speakers today. To the far audience right over there is Dr. James Dyer. He was born and raised in Michigan, and he received his MA in Writing and Pedagogy from the University of Northern Michigan. After graduate school, he worked for the Nature Conservancy, who hired him to hike little-known trails in Michigan's Upper Peninsula and write about his experiences. And despite having found that dream job, he quit after a time to work for the Peace Corps for 2 years, where he taught English to middle school and high school students in Cambodia. After his time in the Peace Corps, he attended Texas State University, where he received his doctorate in education and developmental education in 2024. His current phase of life brings him to EOU as an assistant professor of English writing. He lives in La Grande with his 3 cat children, who, he has been told, are much cleaner than human children. To his right is Dr. Jennifer Slinkard. She is also an assistant professor of English writing, as well as the director of CORE. She has also worked for the Peace Corps in Mauritania and Liberia. Her professional interests include transitions to higher education, L2 writing, language identity, language policy, and writing pedagogy. Her favorite Christmas, so far, was spent electrofishing in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Bright Angel Creek at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. She also likes cats, but thinks dogs are way better. So today we will see if cats and dogs can live together, and we will also hear a bit about the work on updating the Core 101 curriculum, and they will plan to share some of the history of the Core program, the shifting demands and expectations, and the epistemologies that are present in different academic disciplines.
Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Yeah, thanks.
I sort of expected there to be nobody on Thursday of finals week. So yeah, thanks for showing up.
Yeah, thanks, y'all. Much appreciated. So our study that we're going to present to you today kind of comes from this current moment that we're living in, where we see our students in our courses and we see the ways that they're engaging with text as being maybe different than before. So we're going to present our work with the curriculum audits, which is a research method for studying the literacy expectations in different academic disciplines and courses in a lot of different areas, but we're going to focus obviously on higher education. So we're going to start by giving some brief institutional background on CORE and our first year seminars here at EOU and kind of how they've evolved into what they are today. We're going to go through the different data that we've collected from students and faculty on both students' perceptions of the text and text task demands of being in higher education, and then focus inversely on the faculty perspectives on text and text task demands. We're going to go through our next steps for our study, where we're hoping to take this, give you guys a chance to ask some questions, and then ask you guys to actually do the survey yourselves and potentially sign up to come talk to Jenny and I more in depth about our research. So yeah. So our current literacy context that we're living in, I think we're all used to reading and seeing and folks bemoaning how students these days just aren't reading like they used to. There are several really fairly well-known articles that have come out in the last couple of years. If you've seen this article, America is sliding towards illiteracy, pretty scary language. Is this the end of reading? Came out from the Chronicle. And then this one from the Atlantic, which I think got a little bit more play, was about the, quote, elite college students who can't read books. And then that last headline, just to kind of put this in a more historical context, the way we view students and reading now is not new. I think every generation, every 10 or so years, we kind of bemoan like, oh, students aren't reading now like they used to. This headline, people don't read anymore, is actually from the 30s. So this is not a new phenomenon, but there are some things about our current context that are new, i.e. this idea of like pandemic learning loss that we're trying to kind of unpack with our students now through this study.
Yeah, so I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because most of you know the institutional context. But these are sort of the parts of the institutional context that we think are important to consider for our study. Sorry, can I see at least? Thanks. So we're small and rural with a large local population of on-campus students. We have a primarily white student body, but we do have a large population of students from the Pacific Islands. And we have a significant number of athletes who come from around the country, so not just locally. Of course, like James mentioned, we have the COVID learning loss, although this is about the significant faculty administrative turnover. So I think that has to do with, since I arrived, there have been, I think, 3 provosts, two interim presidents, a couple of different student affairs directors. So we have significant administrative turnover that affects how students get placed into classes and how we can then serve them as well. The lowered GPA requirement too hasn't yet maybe played out in our study yet, but we expect that it will. So here is a slide about our previous first year experience structure. And thanks to FYE council members, Sarah and Corey, who are here today. I think those are the only ones. Yeah. So it used to be that we had Uni 101 was a 3 credit and then a 1 credit course for students who didn't place into Writing 115 and a remedial math class who took Core 101. And potentially took Core 102 as a follow-up class. This class was paired with that Writing 115 class, so students were taking both of those classes as a cohort. It was originally developed as part of a TRIO grant and then just transitioned into being part of the institution outside of that grant. Writing 115, of course, is a 4 credit first year writing course that was paired with that Core 101. And Math 090 was a 4 credit developmental math course. Now, there has been some changes with that one as well, outside of our Core 101, but sort of at the same time of the redesign of the first year experience structure. Some emphasis or some issues with this model is that there was an emphasis on the cohort model, but there wasn't curricular connection between Writing 115 and Core 101 from the time that I arrived, at least. Previously, when it first began, there was curricular connection, but it had sort of split into 2 separate classes that students took together. There was also a challenge differentiating first year seminar from the support course. So Core 101 was meant to be, maybe was designed originally to be a co-rec for that Writing 115 class. With the development of Uni and some other institutional changes, it also sort of became the first year seminar as an introduction to the university, sort of a dumping ground for all the different resources that students have available to them. That meant that there wasn't time in that 10 weeks to provide the kinds of literacy supports that they may have been getting when the course was first designed or that they needed in conjunction with that Writing 115. We also had a number of students taking multiple support courses. We had at least a couple of students who were enrolled in Uni, Core, Writing 115, and Math 072, meaning that that was all they were doing. They were just doing remedial classes. They weren't taking any classes that might spark their interest, what they want to do at college. Different needs among students in 115 and challenges with institutional communication and lack of collaboration across different bodies, which I think we're going to talk more about that later on at the end of our presentation.
So our long-term plan with this research is essentially we want to collect data from our students and our faculty now as a way to develop these first-year seminar courses into full developmental support courses for our students. We also are hoping to get buy-in from core English and math faculty and disciplinary faculty in order to get input on what goes into these developmental support courses. These courses that are meant to scaffold the academic skills and strategies that students need to be successful. Our overall long-term plan, though, is also to hopefully pinpoint our research and do several high DFW courses at EOU that we've noted students struggle in. And then do this curriculum audit in these courses in order to scaffold our own core courses appropriately. So yeah, our current first-year seminar model, we have separate core, we've separated core from our co-requisite writing class, Writing 115, and we've developed these 3 sections of first-year seminar. The first one centered on university exploration. The second one that we're going to be talking about in more detail centered on metacognition and reading, writing, and study skills. Metacognition, so just thinking about thinking. And then this final one based on cultural exploration for students. We are attempting to develop a directed self-placement model, which is kind of one really popular method for placing students into these courses based on their own preferences and individualized needs. However, we've kind of had a couple hiccups along the way with really implementing this fully. And this is more for posterity's sake, unless you want to sit here and read all this text. This is kind of how we are attempting to advertise, poor choice of words, but to present information about these courses to both our advisors and our students, specifically as a way to help students make an informed choice on the course that they're taking to support them.
Yeah, this is another sort of for posterity slide. There's a lot of text here. These are the course outcomes for the class and the different assessment and grading, the different kinds of assignments that we have. Primarily, I think we just want to illustrate that we are focused on literacy skills. Critically reading, analyzing, and responding to text is our #1 course outcome. Many of these other ones are supporting that first outcome, applying active reading skills, reflecting on their metacognitive processes as related to reading and writing, etc. So if you have questions about the curriculum, we can come back to this and talk more about the assignments that we do in class.
Okay, so our approach to collecting data, institutional data collection, these curriculum audit tools have been around for a minute. I've gotten a chance to do this before with nursing classes, where we go into nursing classes, we observe what they're doing in the classroom, the kind of text they're interacting with, and we talk to both faculty and students about the text and text task demands in these classes. These surveys are often also used to recruit students. That's kind of how we've been trying to recruit students for our focus groups. And we plan on using these again to recruit students for our, not our winter semester, but our spring semester focus groups, I think, for students. These come from, again, the field of college reading is actually quite old, back from the days where, college students were the only applicable, readily available students for professors to experiment on with their literacy interventions. However, these institutional reality checks come from this history of college reading in higher education. The idea, though, that I want to make sure I differentiate is that we're not attempting to use this research to make any kind of broad generalizations about the landscape of reading writ large in the United States. The nice thing about these reality checks is that they're highly contextualized. So what is true for EOU will not be true for U of O. And that is kind of a feature, not a bug, of this data collection method. The kinds of things that we want to learn from reality checks, we want to look at the different types of reading materials that students come into contact with. And one thing that I think we'll talk about as we talk about the faculty side of things are cross disciplines. Oftentimes faculty aren't really aware of what other faculty are using for course text, be it textbooks, novels, PowerPoints, videos. actual artifacts in a classroom that students are expected to inspect and identify. We also want to look at the kinds of things students are doing with those texts. Are they reading a textbook and asked to directly apply it to a term exam? We want to look at how many texts students are interacting with, and also like how much they're expected to read. This is also highly variable, oftentimes across different disciplines. We are also asking questions about how instructors are organizing their content and how they're evaluating student work. Now, this is not as a way to do, I think, what we're used to doing. We're not, evaluating an instructor's pedagogy or approach to class. We're simply looking to identify and describe what the context is for students so we can better support them in these classes.
Yeah, so right now what we have done so far, we have done a faculty survey. Maybe some of you participated in that, focused on faculty who are teaching general education courses. We're also really interested in looking at the high DFW classes. I'm not sure if they're represented in our data right yet. We've done, or we want to do, faculty focus groups or one-on-one interviews, recruiting from that set of individuals who took the survey, and we're hoping to start that next term. We have done a couple of different student surveys. Those who are enrolled in Core 101 in fall of 2023 to 24, those are the ones who are represented in our study right now. And we did an additional student survey this term, and we have a lot of data to look at. We have like over 120, I think, students right now to add to this current data. And then, yeah, we've done one focus group so far with students, and we hope to do at least one more focus group coming up in winter or spring of this year. And then course observations as well to see, to have direct observation of how the instructors present text and text tasks to students in their courses. So these are reporting on the faculty survey results from last year. Some of the things that we were collecting were class expectations. So how much and how often are students expected to read texts? That varies significantly across the different courses that we had reported on. Same with hours spent on coursework and independent understanding of the course content. So how the students are understanding what they are meant to do. The literacy modalities, so are they expected to take tests? Are the tests heavily reading based? What are the texts that they are actually reading? Are they textbook, journal articles, short stories? Are they reading novels? That matters when you're trying to help prepare students to be successful across different kinds of disciplinary contexts. We also looked at how expectations are relayed to students. So whether the instructors are giving students those expectations just at the beginning of the year, or if they are doing it kind of weekly, just before a test. That way we know how to prepare the student, like, oh, hey, you really need to make sure that you're listening on the syllabus day, because that's the day that you're going to get all of the information from your instructor about what you are expected to do. So this chart here you can see is very, very colorful. The question is, on average, I expect students in this course to spend blank hours per week outside the class preparing for the course requirements. So this was a little tricky because we included 3 credit and 4 credit hour classes, but they range from 0 to 12 hours a week. So significant differences. Communicating how that is different to the students is something that we need to consider. Biggest challenges perceived by the instructors. So we asked instructors what they thought students are challenged by in their classes. Number 1, spending time outside of the class on homework. We know that's an issue from students who didn't have to do homework at all during COVID when they were in high school. They also report that they think students have trouble asking questions. This too seems to be kind of a newer thing, potentially coming from the social isolation experience during COVID and more time looking at screens and less time practicing asking questions of their peers. And then we had all these other ones that were kind of tied that had equal responses. Taking reading notes, being an effective test taker, understanding college expectations, going to class, and doing their homework. This is where the title of our presentation comes from. My students tend not to be readers, period. So reading a text on my discipline is doubly difficult for them. There is a general sense that students are unprepared or underprepared to be successful in their disciplinary classes after they get through their developmental classes. Let me see, is there? One of the things too, I have just a little note here. I wrote that a ton of the instructor comments focused on reading, but also on transfer of reading skills. So if, for example, if we have a biology instructor and an art instructor and an English instructor, teaching students skills that are going to transfer across all of those disciplines is quite difficult. The different kinds of texts that are going to be required for across the disciplines is something that we are considering and trying to do.
Okay, so now I want to kind of step in and talk a little bit about our student findings. They, I think, aligned with our faculty findings in really interesting ways, and then deviated in a couple other interesting ways. So we did student surveys last spring, where we grabbed 17 students who were enrolled in Core 101 in both the fall 2024 and 23 terms. And then of this pool of students, we're able to do one focus group with our students to kind of better elaborate on our answers. We kind of broke down our findings into several categories. The first one being our students' expectations on college before coming here. So these are their expectations coming out of high school. Overwhelmingly, our survey data suggested from our respondents that students were having trouble with the amount of homework. And I think all of us as faculty sitting in this room have probably experienced that at some point in the classroom. Our students struggling with this idea that they sometimes even have to do homework. Both of our focus group participants that we were able to talk to also, somewhat ironically, expected college to be harder. We'll talk about this a little bit later on, but this idea of, you know, college is hard right now and I'm struggling, but I thought it was going to be even harder, is something that I think we as core faculty really need to deal with and as we're preparing students. This quote from our focus group I think was really interesting. This student's father always made things seem worse when he was at college. He told stories about writing 25-page essays in like that first year class, which I don't have a 25-page essay in my first year writing class that I teach. Maybe I should. So he was, I think, really expecting this, you know, he said his dad had gone to an Ivy League school, and that's what kind of he was expecting coming in here. However, the same student also noted struggling, that he was struggling in some of his classes in interesting ways.
Yeah, before I move on to the next slide, I just want to add to that the course of core, we have this sort of dual role of being accessible and welcoming and helping students feel like they belong here, as well as helping them raise to the standard that they might have expected of them in their other classes. So that is, I see as like a dual sort of thing, that we want to have high standards, high expectations for students, but we don't want to put up barriers so that students can't be successful at those standards. So another thing about the student findings was their perception of reading expectations. The faculty survey mirrored this, right? That they have vastly different expectations for reading depending on the discipline. One of our students reported on business communications where they had no reading requirement in that class. Composition 2 had 1 to 2 hours per week, and Adventure Lit had 5 to 6 hours per week. So significant differences across these students who were the same right there. They had taken the core class at the same time. So presumably they're the same year of student taking these similar classes. One of the students had switched from psychology to business administration because the psychology major had been too difficult. And so he reported that psychology was a lot harder, a lot more reading, a lot more scientific reading, just going through all those books, all the articles, just going through all that, and then compared to this new major, I don't really have to do much. So there is this perception that there are hard majors and there are easy majors, and students are making decisions kind of based on that, not necessarily only based on their interests.
This other finding is something that I've noted in my other curricular audit work, but it's something we've kind of struggled to find a name for. Reading fidelity is kind of the throw-in term that we've come up with, but it's this idea that, are students, to what degree are students actually doing the readings that are expected of them? One of the things we found from our survey is that just under half of our students are reading less than 75% of the assigned readings in class, with some of them reading, as low as less than 25% of the assigned readings in class per each week. In other research, we've noted this phenomenon of, they call it text workarounds, that students are interacting with. So this is, I don't understand a concept, I'm going to go look on YouTube and see what this is. Or, I don't understand a concept, I'm going to, use my professor's PowerPoint instead of getting it from the textbook. And this is something or God forbid AI, is kind of a more common one that we're all dealing with. From our focus group, there was this belief that professors, in fact, don't even expect and students in some classes to do all the readings. With one student even saying he tries to prioritize his readings based on, understanding, do I even need to read this thing? Is my professor even expecting me to? On the flip side, there are some students in some majors that are, expecting students to read text multiple times in order to understand it.
So this is something that we talked about quite a lot, is being able to understand why they're reading a text. The way that you read a text is going to be different depending on why you're reading it, right? Are you reading it to study for a test, to do an assignment, to write a paper? And so having students sort of recognize why they're reading texts is something that we're working on really in Core 101. So one of our survey participants wrote that they understand the papers themselves were short. Not a lot of students will want to read that much about something they don't really care about. So they think that because they don't care about it, they're not interested in the topic, then they don't want to read the assignment. They also, I think, is this from the question that we asked them what they would like us to know, I think? So this other quote, it would probably be letting us know where we should focus on more. They really wanted direct, explicit, why am I reading this, and what parts of the text am I supposed to read? So I think they are hoping that their instructors are going to tell them, oh yeah, you don't have to read this whole thing, just read this one little paragraph, and that's going to tell you what the information that you need. In the focus group, one of the participants said, this quote here, make sure you have the answers in your head compared to reading for an assignment. I'm reading to answer the next class. So they really are, at least in the focus groups, they're reading to answer whatever the questions are, not really for a holistic understanding of the text or for the discipline as a whole. It's sort of a task-based kind of reason that they see reading. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about that.
So we also asked our students, like we asked faculty, what are some of the overall challenges that you're having in your courses related to reading? And it kind of broke down in our survey really similarly to how professors perceived, instructors perceived. With the, we asked students to rank the top 3 challenges that you had. The overwhelming, like the large amount of students mentioned studying outside of class. And then if we combine those other 2 categories on tests, this idea of being prepared for the tests or exams that they're asked to take was another large challenge. From the focus group, they elaborated a little bit more on their challenges with specific texts. For example, in this psych class, the student mentioned, this idea of reading a 50-page article. It was something that he stressed about. He, struggled to, keep his focus across all of those 50 pages. He really didn't want to read it, and he was looking for, a workaround for that. Also, he noted that, and we'll get back to this idea of our students and their self-perception. The student admitted to us, he said he thought, students these days don't have the, quote, brain capacity to understand it. And he was looking for it to be, quote, dumbed down to help him understand these things.
To the dumbest way possible.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, clicker. Yeah, so some of the revisions that we are planning to make in our curriculum. So right now, the text types, we have a unit where we, based off of Beth Piatote's book, the students read Fish Wars, if you're familiar, that short story, which is, it includes a young girl, I think she's 11 years old, her perspective on the fish wars when her dad and brother get arrested for fishing. And we had students then read about this chapter on fishing and values connected with fishing, but we realized that neither of us are experts in fishing or fish management or conservation, and it doesn't really matter. We don't really have to have them read a scientific text in order to have kind of a variety of different reading skills and text types that really we can teach to our own passions, as long as it is sort of like more of a discipline-specific lecture plus a test. We have a midterm so that we can have them talk about study skills and test-taking skills, and that way. We can't just talk about test-taking without them actually taking a test, right? It has to be contextualized, or they're just taking notes that maybe they will lose and they'll never think about that again.
And one of the things that I think it's really important to mention are, we're collectively faculty from all different kinds of disciplines here. When you talk about preparing students for academic literacy in different disciplines, there's no one way to do it. For example, I can try my best to prepare students for Steve's math class. However, that's not going to prepare students for Nancy's Shakespeare class. The confluence of ideas at our current moment has centered on this idea of metacognition being the answer to these disciplinary literacy divides. We're getting students to think about the kinds of skills or tasks that are expected of them in different disciplines, in different expertises, and having them understand where those differences lie. So to understand, there are some majors where the texts you're going to be interacting with are textbook chapters, whereas there are other disciplines where the texts you interact with might be multimodal. So I observed a class where students were, asked to handle animal specimens to identify them. Preparing students for something like that is very different than preparing students to read in a creative writing or a literature class.
Yeah, and also I think that illustrates how students are going to be taking classes that they have different levels of interest in. But they still have to have strategies to be successful readers across those kinds of texts. and those kinds of subjects. So I think we already have somewhat an explicit sort of introduction to the purposes of general education, maybe not quite as much as they do in the Core 102, which is an introduction to the institution as a whole. Also looking for how students can find points of entry. How can they connect to a reading that they might not at first glance feel interested in or connected to? As well as talking about this flexibility and focus that they will need when they get to their career. We all know that not all aspects of our jobs are really exciting and interesting, and we want to do it all the time. And we still have to be successful in those parts that we don't like. I think that is something that is generational too, that students expect to enjoy all of their school, and if they don't enjoy it, well, maybe they just don't want to do it. How can they work around and get out of it?
And I could hear kind of the wheels, the anchor wheels turning in some of your heads when we mentioned a student wanting, for example, their professors to tell them exactly what they needed to read, or exactly what parts of a reading that they could skip. I hear you. I hear the wheels turning. One of the things that I think is really important with emphasizing metacognition in these classes is giving students the responsibility to identify their own reading purpose. For example, myself professionally, I'm going to cop out to you guys. I do not read every single article that I need to read with, like, front to back. There are certain sections in a scholarly journal article that I will gravitate towards depending on my purpose for reading that thing. This is something that we do professionally and something that I think our students can be equipped to do academically in these other classes.
Yeah, and then we recognize that the integrated mentors in the Core 102 has been really successful for students to have a peer to consult, to look up to, and we want to integrate it more meaningfully into our Core 101 section. So that was something that we were I think really excited about, to have mentors in our classes this year, but they weren't not entirely integrated or very well integrated into the classes, and so we want to build that more meaningfully going forward. This one too, I think, is huge, so it gets its own slide. And also, if you have the answer to how to do this, how do we counter students' internalized deficit narrative? The idea that they need all of their text to be dumbed down, that this entire generation is not able to do the kinds of higher level reading skills that we do, that we think students should do. I believe that they can do it, and we need them to believe they can do it too. And we need you to believe they can do it too.
And one thing to add on, I think, coming from, owning up to being a millennial, I was also used to hearing this thing of how hard it used to be when my grandfather had to walk 10 miles through the snow to take an exam or something. This old man yells at cloud kind of idea of the kids these days. And I think one of the things that we noted that was very, very different, our students really did not push back on that ideology in our focus groups. They kind of accepted that they may be struggling now, but also at the same respect, like, they perceived college as having been so much harder in the past. And this is kind of a circle that we need to figure out how to square, I think, in these classes.
Yeah, so some challenges with our study. We had low participation, as expected. We have a low pool to draw from, so that was not a surprise, but we're glad we have more data now to look at. We had questions that were really similar for faculty and for students, but they were read quite differently. We could tell that by the way that the responses that came, that faculty were reading questions differently from how students were reading the questions, and so that made some of our data kind of irrelevant. Also, students misinterpreted questions, so the answers that they gave were also, not all of them were relevant. We had students who were in different types of classes. It's really hard to compare those like that Adventure Lit to a Comp 2 class, which are obviously different kinds of classes, different levels of classes, and that ever-evolving institutional first-year seminar structure just means that data from 2023 has curriculum that's different from 2024, from 2025, and so it's hard to make comparisons across those students. Sure, yeah. So also challenges that we have with our institution at maybe remediating some of the challenges we identified for students is that we have significant silos in and lack of communication across the different support services that are available for students. We have support services here quite well, but communication across those services is a significant challenge. Advising, like we said, we wanted to have directed self-placement, but communicating with advisors sort of indirectly meant that that didn't happen like we wanted it to.
In terms of placement as well was a large challenge. I think, overall, I think we grabbed at least a slight majority of the students that we anticipated for each of these classes. However, there was preponderance of what we call a severe error rate in terms of placement, students who are placed well outside of the class that they was best suited to support them. I think we're still analyzing our data from this fall, but I think it was slightly over half of the students remarked that they felt they were placed into this core class based on what worked best for their schedule, or were just unsure of how they were placed into it, which is obviously not what we would want to see with a class we're designing to specifically support students who maybe have different academic needs. I'm sure you guys can imagine, it's quite boring to be in a class that focuses on reading and study skills if you're a student who has several AP classes under your belt and doesn't feel like you need these things. The reverse is true if you're a student who maybe didn't honestly take the OccuPlacer and were placed several levels outside of their level for math and are now struggling in a much more advanced class.
I think the next two maybe belong together, the Learning Center and Student Affairs, and just the lack of, maybe it's not even a lack, it's sort of an unclear, where do these first year seminars belong? We're teaching it as literacy with a literacy focus. We think that students really need that support. And with different calls from different groups to say, oh, they also need financial literacy, for example, which we don't think they don't need. We just don't know how to squeeze all of those needs into this literacy focused class. The writing program, they're another player in this, I think, to illustrate that we have sort of different groups who are all doing different things to support these students. The First Year Experience Council has been working on remediating the silos, and I think to some extent they have, and to others there's still a lot of work to do. And then this last one, we just recently saw sort of a snippet of the work that those who are on working on the academic master plan are doing, and sort of pitting which groups are successful based on how much money they are bringing in, how costly they are for the institution. I think that doesn't really bode well for us to see us all as working together to support these students and to help them be successful as a whole across EOU, which is still a liberal arts institution as far as I'm aware.
So our next steps of our study, we're hoping to do faculty interviews and focus groups. One of the things we have noted and a struggle with our research is that it's really challenging to get a bunch of faculty in the room and ask them the same questions about the expectations in their discipline. We all know the expectations in our disciplines are quite different. So one of the things we're hoping to do is to pinpoint a couple of courses where we notice our students maybe tend to struggle in, and then doing interviews with faculty in these courses to get an idea of what they think students need to be successful in these classes, so that we can then turn around and design our core curriculum to meet those needs, or to at least scaffold students into understanding that these expectations are there.
Yeah, sorry.
We're
I just lost my train of thought because it's really hot in here.
we're also looking to go in and observe some courses too. So if you would be into that, please let us know. This is, again, we're not evaluating pedagogy. We are simply trying to reverse engineer this core class to support these students.
Yeah, and then adding the additional student data that we have already collected this term, as well as doing some more focus groups and continual curriculum revision and reflection, which is ongoing. We're always going to be doing that, especially maybe for this core class.
So yeah, thanks. If
Yeah.
anyone has any questions, throw them at us. We can handle it. Oh yeah,
First of all, let's thank our speakers. Any questions?
Thank you. Just to clarify, you were looking at the Core 101 students when you were asking about their reading practices, not Core 102.
Yes.
Are you thinking about going back and seeing how students who didn't place into developmental math and writing might also answer those questions?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great idea.
We were, our approach was kind of more we didn't strictly adhere to a case study methodology, but I think that was our approach, this idea of bounding, our students into a case of Core 101. But I think you're right. This, with our placement struggles that we've been having, I think that is certainly relevant as we collect data the rest of the year.
Nancy.
Thank you. This is exciting. I love seeing the research of teaching. It's pretty cool. Another thought about your project. We have a lot of students arriving at Eastern with dual credit writing 121. And it seems to me that the core sequence, the core 101, 102, and the Hume might be a good venue to track whether the students who have dual credit writing 121 actually have the skills that that course purports to provide.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and I think we have kind of talked about that in our first year experience council meetings. One of the challenges with it are, yeah, sure. One of the challenges is that the core first year seminar in general is not required. And there are, I think, really good explanations for not requiring it. And there are other really good explanations for requiring it. So we're still kind of working through that. How do we capture all of the potential students who might benefit from a course like ours or like Core 102 without it seeming like a drain on their, their move to graduation? Like, oh, they can't graduate in 4 years. And so we push them really quickly into a class that they're maybe not prepared for, and maybe they end up stopping out anyway. So, like we don't necessarily want to require students that don't need it, but even that, like this idea that it is only like necessary if they need remediation, I think is something that we could maybe unpack that a little bit. And there are just other benefits to having an onboarding experience, even if you don't need, remediation.
And then also, so like multiple measures for placement has been kind of the gold standard in higher ed for a while now. One thing I would be really interested to find out is kind of as dual credit is becoming more ubiquitous, how that would affect this research that tells us we need to look at, student GPA and, placement assessments like the AccuPlacer to make that informed decision. I'd be really interested to learn how that pans out, like nationwide, but also here at EOU, right? Like, yeah.
Other questions? AD.
Andrew David, mathematics. It's been my impression, and I don't know how substantiated this is, that a large number of my students coming in have never actually read a math textbook. Either they weren't required to or never even had one in previous schools. Have you asked those type of questions? And do you have any data or comments on that?
I used to teach a whole unit on textbook reading. I worked with folks at Texas State to develop a textbook kind of reading self-efficacy scale. And I stopped doing it because I noted that my students coming in, I would ask them, so what's your experience with textbooks? And they would reply, never read one. So yeah, I don't really know. This kind of fits into that whole idea of a text workaround that we're seeing certainly in higher ed. My area of expertise is not high school, so I can't speak to how common that is in high school, but certainly in higher ed, I know that is definitely a thing.
I just want to add that we didn't ask them specifically that, but we did ask students if they felt they were prepared for college when they first started. And what we're noticing is that if they think about when they first came, they feel prepared. And then later they say, no, actually I wasn't prepared. So, when they first come here, maybe they think, oh yeah, I'm ready. And then they get here and they don't really know. They're like, oh no, I'm actually maybe not. So I think that has something to do with that, right? Like they have different requirements, different kinds of reading that they have never done before.
Other questions?
Right here in the front.
This is maybe more general than not directly related to your study, but what can you tell us about how we should be thinking about meeting our students where they're reading or what they're reading versus which maybe challenges us as faculty, right, to figure out what they have been reading already, right, and help them and help ourselves think about it versus asking them to read what we're passionate about and what the discipline might demand. What are the sort of like pros, cons, benefits to drifting one direction or the other?
I got a lot of feels about that one. So we know in studying dyslexia in older students that I think what commonly does not work is simplifying or requiring less reading. Dyslexia certainly in older students is quite curable. Just they need to read. I think in terms of faculty preparing their students, one thing that is really helpful is I believe Jody Holshoe at Texas State did a lot of research, is asking your student, so what's the word I'm looking for? Modeling for your students how you interact with a text. When you're reading something, what are you looking for? I had the chance to work with librarians to have my students read some academic scholarly journal articles. And I'll tell them, this is what I'm looking for when I'm reading something in my field, right? If I'm trying to model a methodology, I'm in that methodology section. If I'm creating a lit review, well, a lot of what I need is often in the abstract. I think for literature, it sort of works the same. I mean, if you're asking students, for example, to write a braided essay, what are you looking for as you're giving them examples of what a braided essay is, and just modeling that for them, not simplifying or lessening the amount of reading that you're asking them to do. That is, I think, not the answer.
Yeah, definitely not requiring less reading, I think. I was just going to add, too, about having kind of a heavier scaffold at the beginning of the term and then weaning away the scaffold as you move through. So if they are, maybe your question is more about topics, like you're really passionate about nature writing and maybe they don't really care about nature. They want to read about the big city. So I think helping them identify wherever those points of connection are, because they are there, right? Even if they're hard to find, I think we're doing that all the time, finding, oh, how can I relate to this in whatever way that I can? And also having that more explicit sort of expectations at the beginning, and then not just ripping them away, but sort of like scaffolding them down so that they can then develop their own ability to find their own interest in the text. At least that's how I do it in my class, right? That I have kind of really scaffolded readings where I'm telling them what to look for.
So just to follow up to that, I think we've taken this sort of inoculation approach, like the least amount of time that we can ask students to do something somehow is going to save them from deficit thinking or something. Do you, given what you have learned so far, is a 10-week Core 101 class enough?
I mean, I want to say no for some students, no. But I also think that for other students, maybe yes. So maybe it differs for different students. And I think I'm also a big fan of having opportunities to fail where the student can try something and I like find their limit. We don't want to like set their limit for them, right? We want to set a limit really super high and let them test themselves against that without penalizing them. However we can avoid that, oh, because you didn't finish, that means you're a failure. I think that is really different from the idea that, oh, I didn't get there yet, but I'm working toward this. So yes, or no, I mean, no.
I think this is one of the drawbacks of our current kind of moment we're in with higher education support, where we've moved away from these multiple levels of remediation for a lot of really good reasons. But one of the benefits of having those multiple levels is you can kind of Neapolitan style, like this student needs strawberry, right? This student needs vanilla. That is really hard to do when we only have this one term to deal with. For students who are maybe exist across a vast spectrum, or other polygonal whatever of needs for other flavor of ice cream. So yeah, that's like, it's kind of it'd be great if I had my pick. It would be we have these other multiple options for students, but as it is, we have one. So yeah.
I just want to add one more thing, and that is the opportunity for just-in-time support. So that seems to be maybe an avenue to explore, but it costs money, right? To have, okay, we want to allow some students in this 200 level course to have this additional support that we know that costs money, and we're just not getting a lot of money. We're getting less money.
We probably have time for one more question.
This is more of a softball, I guess. Where do you think that reading for pleasure, the lack of reading for pleasure, comes into this?
I would say that not all students are not reading for pleasure, that many students are reading for pleasure. I think students are also doing more listening to story, and I think that there's an opportunity there that I haven't quite worked out yet. Like I don't think listening counts as reading, but I think it can be, and our focus group participants talked about it as a bridge to, or as a way to support their reading, that they can listen and read at the same time. So maybe James has more to say.
Can I make cause my youngest child, when she was like in grade school, in kindergarten, they would read for pleasure in class, but they had to put a Post-it every time they made a mental connection to something. And so when you're talking about like kids as COVID, she was a COVID high school kid, but she'd learned that skill as a kindergarten first grader to make these connections by reading fun things. And so that's kind of where I'm thinking about, like, where is that's missing? And like when you're listening to a story, it's still reading, but it's not the same kind of reading or whatever.
Yeah, I guess I would just, what I was going to say exactly, but I would just add that the reason we're maybe more focused on like efferent reading instead of like reading for pleasure is that where we find students struggle is how to engage with a text that I'm bored by. Right, that's where all these strategies come in, or that's hard. These strategies aren't as relevant for something that I enjoy reading. Yeah, but I did have an assignment over Thanksgiving break where I asked students to read just for fun, and the results were really fun. So I had fun.
We also do have an assignment in our Core 101 class where students pick a topic of their own and they get to explore that avenue. So we're trying to include other places for students to like read to their interests, or to find their interests based on something that they don't think they're interested in. That Fish Wars actually provided a lot of different avenues. Like there are so many different sort of points of entry that if you help students find them, I think they can. Yeah, so was that the last one?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so please, if you haven't, or even if you have already participated in the survey and you maybe have another class that you can report on, we want to know more. So we will maybe send this out again, but we had planned or talked about sort of coercing everybody here into taking our survey, and we realized that wouldn't be maybe ethical to make you do it. So thank you, thank you for taking our survey, and yeah, thanks for coming.
Thank you.